Hello, and welcome back to the Mindful Education Summit. I'm Chris Willard, one of your hosts. And in this session, we'll be talking with Caverly Morgan. And I'm so excited about this conversation. Caverly and I have met before, but we're going to have a much more in-depth conversation. And she's the founder and the guiding teacher of Peace in Schools, which is such a cool, innovative program because it's a 4-credit course for kids that's being implemented across a number of the schools, public schools in Portland and beyond. And so I'm really excited for all of us to hear a bit more about how it's being brought in and really what are the implications of this kind of program about really teaching compassion, connection, mindfulness, and more in our schools. So Caverly, thank you so much for being here.
Chris, thanks. I'm just delighted to connect. And I really could talk about what's been happening with Peace in Schools all day long. So you'll just have to reel me in, keep me to the point. And yeah, it's actually lovely to share. It's an exciting time to share. We have some fun new news. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So I guess if we could just get started with a little bit about your origin story, like what's, maybe a bit of your journey with all of this work, but then really also the journey with Peace in Schools. How did that get started? And then just a little bit about what it is too. We'll get more into that, but if you could just share with us how this got started.
Sure. So I actually have a background in training monastically. So I trained in the Zen tradition. I was a monk for 8 years. And then when I left the monastery where I trained, I was teaching adults meditation. And a woman from one of my workshops came up to me at the end of the workshop and said, the teens that I work with in high school need to know what I just learned in your workshop. And that particular workshop was around working with the inner critic. How to recognize that voice of negative self-talk, how to disidentify from that voice and tools for working with it. So I came in just as a guest and it was remarkable. I'll never forget how much the young people were like sponges. In fact, I'd say more so than a lot of adults I'd worked with, just like ready for that, no resistance, no like, well, I don't know, maybe that voice helps me,
Right.
There was just this immediate recognition. And I think gratitude for seeing, I'm not my thoughts. I'm not that voice in my head. And because that was so profound, it lit something in me around seeing a need. And it just so happened that this woman who brought me in was part of a larger organization. And that just meant that I had organic ways to be a guest in many different settings. And then I was doing an after-school program around mindfulness and social emotional learning over at Wilson High School, public high school here in Portland, Oregon. And the principal was sort of hovering around, and he came up to me after one of the classes and said, unfortunately, they had actually had a suicide in the school the year before. And he knew he needed to bring some kind of program of wellness into that school. And he knew he didn't know what that was. So he didn't come from any kind of mindfulness background. He just saw that what I was doing and how the teens were engaging with what I was doing brought something the school didn't otherwise have. So long story short, he said, you can do some demos. And if you get 25 or so teens to sign up for this class, because I suggested it really needed to be during the school day if he wanted to reach more young people for obvious reasons. And then, so he said, yeah, if you get 20 to 25 people, let's try this. I actually, having not been from a background of being steeped in the educational system, didn't know how radical it was to be proposing that we have a class during the school day. But over 300 teens said, we want the class. So we immediately had this recognition of need and interest. And so he called and tried to hire me full time. I mentioned that I wasn't interested in working for Wilson High School full time. Nothing about Wilson, but I just, I'm very committed to the other work I'm doing in the world. And so we agreed that we'd try 3 sections. So Peace in Schools started in what year would that have been? 2014. As far as we know, the country's first semester-long 4-credit mindfulness course. And so the significance of the class is that it's during the school day, and it's the depth and duration that kind of, I think, makes the class stand out.
And it really is so radical. I mean, I think you're living the dream that so many mindfulness educators are wanting, which is, not only, how can I get this into my local schools, or how can I get out there into the schools and start teaching this, but like teaching it for credit, and then having 300 kids sign up for, like, you've been allocated 25 kids maybe. And then, I mean, you really are, it's incredible. And it's just so powerful to hear about, and then just to know the effect of this work that you're having, the impact on so many kids is just really inspiring, that so many kids are getting this kind of teaching, and they're really getting it in school at the same time. And I think for teens, especially with, we know teens in particular are just, I still have an inner critic that I've worked on for many years, but the teenage years are when that is just like nonstop in your ear all the time. Yeah. And these days, especially with that comparing mind with social media and so much else going on. So I'm just so grateful to the work that you're doing. I imagine the kids in the community is as well. So thank you for sharing a bit about how this got started. And then how do you actually teach this? Like, what are the core components? What's the curriculum? How has it evolved over time with what you've been doing with these kids?
Yeah, I mean, again, the thing that I'm probably most passionate about is how full the class is. So we're with the same set of teens for anywhere between 70 and 75 hours in a semester. And that's more than a lot of the adults I've worked with prior to this. So it's significant. And what that allows us to do is have what I like to think of as a mindfulness 101 component, really just be the foundation of the class. And so what I mean by that is the beginning of the semester is about learning to direct the attention to the present moment. First, we just help teens see where their attention actually is. Because for so many teens, it's novel just to consider that you are not your thoughts, and to notice how the attention tends to feed the thinking mind. That's huge right there. So we start just by seeing how we tend to engage with the thinking mind, but specifically how to direct the attention. So we do that not just through sitting meditation. In fact, sitting meditation is a very small part of the class. The teens are only sitting between 5 and 10 minutes at a time throughout the course, because there's so many other mindfulness tools that seem, in my experience, to be critical for that stage in life and that kind of era of development. And the meditation is just one part of that, just in a sense, a backdrop or a foundation for those other tools. So after we go through the preliminary teaching, training the attention to be in the present moment, to be able to be where you want it to be, at will. We go into processes of the conditioned mind. So, how does the thinking mind work? It's all held in the container of gentle and compassionate inquiry. And that's probably one of my favorite things about the class. We're not saying, here's what you should believe, here's how you should be. Everybody knows it's good to be mindful. Mindfulness can help you calm down or control your anger, or it's finally going to make you the right person. It's really, at the end of the day, a class about inquiry. How does the mind work? How when the thinking mind is doing X, do we respond with Y? And is that actually what you'd choose if you could choose your life experience? So most teens find that to be really engaging and, in fact, quite empowering, to be able to find out that we can question these things, and that through questioning we have conscious choice. So we look at the inner critic, finding the compassionate mentor within, creating the relationship with a compassionate mentor within. We look at how the mind, the conditioned mind, tends to perceive reality dualistically. When we're looking at things through that lens of our conditioning, we see things in terms of black, white, good, bad, right, wrong. And teens, in my experience, are the most engaged in wanting to dismantle that, because they can often feel so stuck in that kind of perception. We look at how we project onto the world when we're like identified or when the attention's aligned with that lens. And then we bring a lot of attention to practices of acceptance, recognition that being able to hold all that we're noticing in this environment of care, which it's just an acronym for confidentiality, acceptance, reverence, and empathy. That's really the container for the course. There's just a lot of community building and intimacy work that allows us to, like the way the teens love to talk about it, is just drop the masks, drop who we've been told we should be, so that we can get a taste of who we actually are. So it ends up, for most teens, being an incredibly connecting experience just to move through the curriculum as a group.
I think, and I love the way you describe it as, the process of inquiry being in many ways so much more important than the mindfulness practices themselves. I mean, I think one of the things that mindfulness does is it starts to provoke that curiosity. And that's such an important part of learning. It's such an important part of growing up. Who am I? Who am I? How do I relate to other people in the world? How do I relate to the world itself? Like, these kinds of questions are really the ones that we want our teens to be asking, and that we don't want to like tell them to ask, but we want to like create the conditions under which these questions start to arise. And then it sounds like what you're also really doing is just creating a space where kids can be vulnerable, but then you've also created this community and connection where they can do that in a safe way. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that's really exceptional, because I think that's a risky thing to do in schools. And I think it takes a lot of skill to be able to do that in schools as well, to allow kids to both open up, but also feel safe enough to connect and to hold that container for themselves and their peers going forward throughout the rest of the day. So that's amazing work you're doing.
Oh, thank
And
you.
Again, really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's incredibly enlivening. And you're pointing to probably the biggest challenge we have around it, which is just training facilitators. We get asked by people every day to expand. It was exciting, actually. In that first course, it wasn't my intention to like have what we were doing become district wide, but we constantly were being asked by other schools. Like the first school who approached us was Rosemary Anderson. We were doing a little bit of work there as well. And they were like, wait, if Wilson High School's getting a full class, we want a full class. And then of course, Cleveland High School. It's actually often the counselors that request the course, because the average counselor has between 200 and 300. Sometimes, I just learned on a recent mindful educator retreat, sometimes 400 teens that they're responsible for. And so there's no way they can really have their finger on the pulse of how these teens are doing, what the state of their inner landscape is. And so it's powerful that we can be the eyes and the ears for the counselors, and we can things arise in the safety of this class, and we can talk to the teen to the best of our ability. We always talk to the teen before we approach a counselor, but we have had many cases where the teen gets extra support that they wouldn't have gotten because of what we're able to get in touch with. So that intimacy between the counselors and our staff is really critical, and again speaks so much to the need and also the skill, right? So just to take it back to your point, a facilitator needs to know when it's the right moment to kind of widen that circle of support, when it's the right moment to just continue to build trust with that teen. There's just so many different nuances that go into holding this course, given the depth. I think that's less true when you don't have the opportunity to be as intimate in this kind of setting. But our course creates that opportunity intentionally. So, and as you're also pointing to, absolutely. I mean, we always have to be holding in our awareness. Okay, so in this class, we're going to get in touch with something that feels tender or vulnerable, and we're going to bring it into the space so that we can know how to mindfully be with that experience and in community with that experience. And this is a kid who has a math test in 45 minutes. So,
right.
How to hold that, how to be with that.
So how do you start to teach facilitators these skills? Can we hear a little bit about that? Because I think that's so challenging and so important to be able to create and cultivate really skilled facilitators. Do you have words of wisdom? I know a lot of folks watching are probably wanting to be as skilled a facilitator as you and your folks are out there. Can you share a little bit about some of the values that you try to impart and how you do that with your facilitators?
Yeah, we're in the process now of creating a training institute, and we've just got what I think of as like tier one in place. And I feel great about, we've had a handful of years now to kind of time test what I think of as tier one. And that's a weekend training. And most of the people who come to these trainings are educators, actually. So it's great because many educators who are working in the schools that we're in. So Peace in Schools as a nonprofit contracts with the Portland Public School District. So we're now in probably 90% of the district. So we're almost district-wide. And we have this partnership with the district. And because our Peace in Schools instructors are not certified Portland Public School employees, each Peace in Schools teacher partners with someone who's employed by the school. So every class has a teacher who's offering mindful movement for a small portion of the class, followed by the Peace in Schools mindfulness instructor that then brings in the mindfulness lesson for the day. So it's a beautiful relationship there. And a lot of the educators in these schools who've seen the class unfold and mostly seen the effect on the students have just demanded in a really beautiful way to learn some more of the tools, which is lovely for us because it organically built out this sort of whole school model that we do want to move in the direction of, where teens aren't just in this isolated class experience, but the other teachers are learning these things. And then the administrators are learning these things. And then we've been doing a little bit of work with some of the parents and family members too. So this tier one involves a weekend training for educators, although anyone can come and take it. There's an 8-week course, and then there's a mindful educator retreat that I've co-led with one of our employees over the last 5 years or so. And we have people fly in from all over for that summer retreat, and probably we'll start offering that more. That's just tier one, and what we're in the process of building from there is a certification program, because we obviously need to be able to move in I say obviously just because of the need and the demand. And I also have had the chance to see this work, so I'd love to see it be able to reach more young people as well as adults. I mean, I'm finding that these educators are really, we've had wonderful testimony about people feeling like what we're offering is transformative on that front too. But so that next tier will be certifying teachers, as it is now when we bring in a new teacher, because we don't have that tier of the institute yet. The person who comes in is required to have a tremendous amount of mindfulness experience before they even apply. And then upon applying, we go through a sort of crash course as well as a full semester shadowing another teacher in a classroom. So it's pretty expensive for us to bring new people in at this point. It's not a model that we can sustain because we're really paying people to meet the need here. But in good time, as we're able to build that institute out, we'll sort of flip that.
And I think that model is the one that I see succeed over and over again. It's not just kind of one and done or going in or even just going in and doing a course, but I think really learning how to fully integrate with the community, partner with the teachers on the ground who are doing this work, with the administrators and the counselors who really know the kids. And because otherwise every school is also so different. Every classroom is different. You don't necessarily know as an outsider what you're going in. What happened in that kid's family the week before, or in their, and in other aspects of their life. And it's so integrated and partnering. And then I really love that, just how much time and how much deliberate effort you're putting into really training and cultivating the facilitators and the co-facilitators. And I have a feeling we're going to be hearing a lot more about your training program going forward. I know I maybe someday I'll be able to get out there when my kids are a little bit older for a training, because it just sounds so powerful for those kids, and that you've put so much thought and care into creating this program. Not just creating the program, but I think also figuring out how to have it grow.
Yeah.
One of the challenges I think mindfulness really faces is that it's so popular because kids are struggling so much, and that's great. But how do we move this movement forward with a real depth, with a real integrity, with a real fidelity, and yet at the same time being able to meet the needs of a school in Portland is going to look different than, I mean, honestly, than another school in Portland, which is going to look different than a school in a rural area or a suburban area or in the north or in the south or in a different part of the world. And I think that's also something that, I think is a real challenge that I think so many programs face is how to adapt to different cultures of different schools and different classrooms. I don't know if you can speak to that, how you've adapted program for different kinds of schools.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten a lot of coaching, which has really been important. So there's pretty early on, there was just a deep recognition that this curriculum arose out of tools that I had been steeped in, tools that I saw as transformative, and I'm a cisgendered white woman, and how we're meeting the needs of many different people. In fact, I brought myself a little cheat sheet because we're doing a research project right now with Johns Hopkins.
Research, all right.
I know. I thought you'd like this, Chris. But I'm not the research one, so I had to bring notes. But it is striking to me that 48.2 ethnic minorities and 15.2 foreign-born students are in the 100-person study that Gia Naranjo Rivera just has completed from Johns Hopkins. She researched the program over the course of a year. And so it's been really important to make sure that our curriculum is constantly being adapted and made culturally responsive and culturally appropriate, and bringing in different voices and adapting lessons so that they're more trauma informed than they were when they first were created. And I couldn't feel better about that whole process. In fact, Gia just won an award through Johns Hopkins for this research project, because it's the first research project that's connecting ACEs, which I know you're familiar with, but some of our listeners might not be, so adverse childhood experiences, and trauma in adolescence. And she got the award because it's the first study globally to focus on mindfulness in a school-based setting and ACEs in trauma and adolescence. So that kind of adaptation process that you're describing has actually become one of our specialties. And I think it's one of the reasons that we are actually quite protective about scaling. As I said, we get asked to scale all the time. And I was speaking with a philanthropist not too long ago, and it was obvious to me that he gives money to programs, he and his foundation give money to programs that scale widely and quickly. And we're not doing that. And I appreciated that when he heard about what we were doing, he said, you all are scaling in depth. And that's actually important for the movement. Focus less right now on scaling in breadth, because you're scaling in depth. And I do feel that we're at because we're serving so many students now. Last year we served literally thousands of teens. I think we're building a model of sorts, which then hopefully can apply to other settings. And so it's not that we've come up with like the curriculum that's perfect for Charlottesville, Virginia. It's that we're coming up with a model that allows for adaptation. We're coming up with a model that allows for student voices to enter the room, that allows for the type of relationship building with the administration and other teachers, so that the theme is always responsiveness rather than here's what we do to you.
So I was actually going to ask, like, how do you get schools interested? How do you get parents and districts interested? But it sounds like they just see what you're doing, and it sounds more like it's more like, how do I keep some of these folks at bay and help them understand that we're working on deepening more than we are working on expanding? So I think we can move on from that question. But as you talk about the research, and by the way, congratulations to all of you for winning that award, because I have other friends whose work has been researched, and it's everybody. It's not just the researchers, it's everybody on that team, and the kids as well, and the schools as well. So congrats to everyone. But what else was the research finding? Was it finding some other cool outcomes, surprising outcomes?
Well, I just happen to have some
What do you
notes,
know?
Chris.
I see pie charts.
It's really great. I love being transparent about the fact that I'm not the research mind of our organization. And I'm so glad that there are people on our team that are. It's not that I have an aversion to it. It's just that, I really see myself as the lead contemplative, and I'd love to meet someone who's a lead contemplative and also the lead researcher. I have yet to see those two things perfectly intertwined. So I hold the contemplative end down and I read the points about the research. But most specifically, what's impressive about this research is that it's putting on the map the hard outcomes for what is deeply hard, as you know, to measure. So first of all, you should know that we only have initial findings for this project, but the initial findings are actually significant enough that Dr. Christina Bethel from Johns Hopkins, who's not our researcher, but connected to our researcher, in July of this year, she was part of the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Reform. That there was a really groundbreaking hearing about childhood trauma. And Dr. Christina Bethel was an expert witness and cited Peace in Schools as a strong school-based approach on addressing childhood trauma and building resilience. And what was impressive about that is that's just based on our initial findings. So the kinds of findings that were most impressive to me were that, just as an example, 30% of the teens in our classroom selected or self-reported being LGBTQ, and 7.4 said checked the box for gender non-binary. One of the reasons that's so significant to me is it's just so much higher than the national average. And it points to how many of these young people are feeling drawn to the class because it is a safer environment to be in. And we all know, I think I read recently that at least in Oregon, the suicide rates in teens, and specifically trans teens, has just skyrocketed. I'm actually sorry, I don't have that number in front of me at the moment. It was a really striking statistic. But 58.9% of the teens in our classes were low socioeconomic status. So they were on free and reduced lunch, and more than 93% had anxiety and depression symptoms requiring follow-up. That was deeply significant to me.
Wow.
So what Gia did is she created, and again, if I was a deep researcher, I'd know the specifics of how she created the scale. But internally, she created a way that her computer would be flagged as students went through the testing. And she would be flagged if she felt there was a need for follow-up. So the students were having enough of a marked experience around anxiety and depression for her to feel that she needed to make sure that they had a safe adult that they could be working with, or that they had a counselor, or that they had a therapist. It was deeply shocking to her, and she's like an expert around working with adverse childhood experiences, that the number was so high. She had to check in with 93% of the students because they had, created this, their responses had created this flag. So the initial, well, before I continue with more, I'll just check to see if there was anything you wanted to comment on around that.
Yeah, well, I do think, something that you're doing also, this is maybe, higher than one would get in a math class, not the rates are necessarily higher, but that the kids are reporting it. And to me, what that shows also is that you really are creating that space that's safe. The other thing that I think is so important, and this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, is that it's really, like, I love how you said that you're the contemplative expert, because I think it's so important that we all feel like we have our expertise and that we also all feel like we have our limits. Like
Mhm.
that, like, some of us might know a lot about research, but then we can leave the contemplative stuff to the contemplative folks. Some of us might know about writing curricula, but can leave the teaching to some other folks. Or some of us might be trauma or mental health experts, and some of us might not. But when we collaborate together, then we can do something like get that data of kids that are maybe a bit more vulnerable, and then find a way to then refer them out to those sources that they need. So I think that's also just so important. And then we can get them the help that they need, which is maybe the class, or maybe it's something deeper than the class itself. So this is really exciting to see how many different kinds of kids that you're having in your class. And what are you seeing in terms of some preliminary outcomes? Is there stuff to get excited about here? I imagine there is.
Yeah, there is a little bit. And first, I'll just comment on what you just said. I couldn't agree more that what makes a program strong is the balance that can be created through everyone's different expertise. So we have a wonderful person named Maggie Steele on our team, and her expertise around social emotional learning is very different, and trauma informed practices just really complements what I'm bringing in to the curriculum. And having Barnaby Willett on our team, who is really partnering with Johns Hopkins to create some of these next steps in the research. It's incredibly important for the health of the organization that there be that kind of balance. And I think it's important for the movement at large, for us to get outside this idea that it's going to happen through, for example, researchers alone or contemplatives alone. It's the amount of compassionate concession that has to happen around what it is that we're wanting to do, because it is a Portland public school, it's just a constant learning, and that it takes a tremendous amount of finesse and nuance. And if we didn't have the balance in our team, I don't think we could be doing it. So I just appreciate that you mentioned that point, because I do see in various mindfulness programs sometimes some imbalance there, and I see the fallout of that.
Absolutely. And so one other question, just to back up a little bit, you were talking about the interest from all different quarters. Are you finding an interest from elementary schools and middle schools, or have you thought about adapting things? You said, a lot of this is powerful for adults, a lot of elements of this curriculum. Have you thought about bringing this to college settings or to other settings of both older and younger kids?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't say that right now it's just a matter of funding, and I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to say that I think we'll be growing at the pace of support that there is for this work, because right now it takes a lot, as you know, to build anything out. And we're currently in the place where what we can handle, and we try really hard to avoid mission creep, is just refining this semester-long mindfulness curriculum and then building out the adult educator training program. We get asked literally at least once a week for middle school curriculum, elementary school curriculum, more direct work with administrators, and all that I think will happen. There's no reason for it not to. And really the only reason that we're currently just focusing on high school is I would like to see us have this model be functioning like a well-oiled machine. There are just so many various issues that we have to work out, union issues, and it's actually somewhat endless. But we've worked out, my just initial hit would be we've worked out 90% of the kinks. We now can go into a school, know how to implement it. We have a way that we first start with freshman workshops so that teens get to taste the class, because it's an elective class. So then the curriculum was designed for 10th through 12th graders. So we have, a really calculated way that teens can taste it and see whether they want to take it and when. And then we have a calculated way of being in relationship with the school, so we're sure to be meeting the needs of the school. So I just would love to see us refine all that before, again, we fall into what I think of as mission creep. And next thing you know, our resources are just spread so thin because we're trying to do too much, but not well. I feel that what we're doing right now, we're doing very well. And I think we're at about 18 employees, and most of those folks are part-time. So it's just going to take building to that next tier of being a nonprofit that can have the capacity to, my greatest vision is for us to build to the point where we have the capacity to build the next tier, that adult training program, because then it'll really be able to expand more fully. And we're doing that also by creating some online programming just within the next few months, actually. We hadn't tapped that world yet, so we'll see how that goes.
And I think, as you said, building that depth before you start going for the breadth too. So another question that I think probably a lot of folks watching have is I guess a little bit on the financials. I don't want to be asking you about who your funders are and send people to knock on their door, but are you mostly funded by the district? Are you partnering with community organizations or seeking out funding or getting parent support? How do you make it work financially, I think is a question. Or what models would you recommend to people that are trying to do this kind of work?
Yeah, we've been really lucky. Again, we didn't set out to be almost district-wide in Portland, but as you heard, the power of what we're doing was recognized. And so we've actually never knocked on a door and said, can we please come into your school? We've just been, I like to think of it as our nonprofit doesn't have a push model, it has a pull model. So we wait to see where we're pulled, and we're fortunate in that we're actually constantly being pulled. And so in that pull model, it creates for a certain type of ease, because by the time a school's in conversation with us, they know they want us. They know they've seen what it's doing in the schools near them. They're ready to commit to supporting the program. So the Portland Public School District in this moment covers about half the costs of us being in the schools. And then we fundraise for the rest. And we have some individual donors. In terms of pie charts, we actually have a very healthy nonprofit pie chart around, foundation support and individual donors. And so we're very fortunate on that front. And again, I think the reason we've been so fortunate is most people that support us are recognizing that creating a model that we can show works, that is of this depth, that isn't just a 6-week intervention with the same set of teens for 6 hours in total, to be able to measure the difference between that kind of intervention and something of this depth. Most people who support us are really investing in what kind of change can happen in a large scale way if we can continue to refine that model and make it scalable. So that's our greatest passion right now. And as I mentioned before, we're just always looking for, as I'm sure most nonprofits are, but we're just always looking for other people who recognize or lit up by this specific vision and mission.
Yeah. So what other exciting things should we know about Peace in Schools? Are there new things coming? Is there anything that I didn't cover that you feel like would be important for viewers to hear about, or that's particularly exciting for you or exciting for the kids in the schools too?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I feel as though I covered a lot of the facts about what we're doing, which is always lovely and I think important. But if I were to pause and look at what hasn't been pointed to, it's really the beauty of what I see to be possible as teens are supported in the remembrance of who they actually are. That's the thing to deeply highlight. Like this, that we live in a world that is deeply changed by young people becoming clear about who they actually are. And the way that a teen who gets in touch with that expresses that understanding completely differs depending on who the teen is, which is part of the magic and the beauty. And I just want to make sure to put that in. So I'm grateful for your open-ended question, because in the times that we're in, I think it's important that we can touch in on that kind of hope. I feel deeply lucky that in these times, I touch in every day and feel infused by a deep, deep experience of hope. And it's because I see firsthand, it's not theoretical, that as young people have a sense of who they are, and then build the capacity to move through the world from that recognition, to build the resilience and the strength and the courage it takes to move through the world from that recognition of authenticity, the world around them changes. The parents, we have someone on our board who had never heard of mindfulness. And this is on the Peace in Schools board, he had never heard of mindfulness. And his young person, his son, went through the program, and he saw such dramatic transformation with his son that he finally was just like, I just need to know what the hell is happening in that class, because I need to just do whatever you're doing. And now he's on our board, and he comes to all of our retreats. And, I lead retreats for adults on the other side of what we do in this organization as well. So, just our mindfulness work, most adults that are drawn to it have seen the power of that transformation and want more of that experience for themselves, which is beautiful to see.
Yeah. Wow. I had a few more follow-up questions, but honestly, that was just like, like, wow. So I think we can probably just kind of finish it there. Although, I do want to ask, are there other ways people can learn a little bit more about Peace in Schools, check out your website, things like that?
Yeah. So the website is peaceinschools.org. And actually, if one is curious, I do love our little videos on that website. And they're little, meaning they're like 4 minutes long, but I think it's really important that people can hear teens talking about their experience.
Yeah.
I can put out all the facts and tell you some of the research and talk about the effect of what we're seeing. But to hear a teen spontaneously talk about unconditional love is radical. It's just radical. And that happens through a deep immersion in not just, again, knowing how to train your attention to be in the present moment, but through constantly being asked to look at what is most authentic in our lived experience. And again, with curiosity and compassion, explore the nature of that authentic experience. And as we explore authenticity, naturally, we have more compassion for each other, naturally. So it's not like we just teach teens they should have more compassion for each other. It all arises organically out of these prompts of inquiry that are constant throughout the curriculum. And it's powerful to hear teens' voices as they share the impact and in their words.
And ultimately what that's doing is it's not just teaching them how to do that self-inquiry, but it's teaching them how to go out into the world and facilitate that inquiry in each other, like in the kids in the class, and when they go off to college or when they go into the workforce or when they go into the world, to continue asking those questions of themselves and of everyone around them, which I think is that beautiful way that you watch these practices and this kind of work really trickle out and really, as you said, really start to change the world. And it's just so inspiring. Yeah. So thank you so much for your wonderful
Chris.
work. And thank you for taking your time off from your work to join us for this interview. I know I've certainly learned a lot, and I really look forward to seeing what comes next from you and from the research and Peace in Schools and everybody, and certainly what comes next from these kids that you're working with, because I'm sure they're going to go off to do amazing things too. So thank you just so much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. It's just been a pleasure. And thank you again for the work you're doing in the world. I got to thank you before our call, but I really do. It takes, we're moving the needle of awareness forward collectively. And I love that about how we're doing what we're doing. So yeah, thanks for being part of that movement so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care.